Hey everyone, I'm Justin with AmericanMuscle.com, and this is going to be my detailed overview and install of the Steeda Ultralite Lowering Springs, available for your 2015 and newer Mustang. In this overview, I'm going to do my best to tell you about some of the unique attributes and benefits when installing the Steeda Ultralite Springs. We'll talk a little bit more about the drop you can expect when everything's installed, and last but not least, we'll actually talk through that installation a little bit as well. And considering the IRS-equipped S550 is a little bit more difficult than the solid rear axle previous generation, there is a little bit more work involved, but nevertheless, it's still not that bad, so 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter with some more detail later on. So the Steeda Ultralite Springs are going to be one of only a handful of spring options here at AM that will offer you that standard or linear spring rate, making them a great choice for the S550 owners out there looking to improve their handling by going with that consistent rate as opposed to going with a varying rate of a progressive spring. Now with that said, it's also going to be a great choice for owners who are looking for a rather aggressive drop with the Ultralites, looking at 1 inch in the rear and just over 1 inch up front, accentuating that factory rake and making for an awesome stance. Now Steeda is a Mustang-only company that's been doing their thing for almost 30 years now, and you can say they've been doing it pretty well. They've actually amassed more wins and records than Shelby, Saleen, and Roush combined, so needless to say they know what they're doing in the competitive world. And without a doubt, some of the parts that have enabled this performance on the track consistently over the years is their suspension, and more specifically their springs. Now just like their competition-based springs, the Ultralites here do feature that linear rate, and what does that mean to you? Well, a linear or standard spring rate is going to offer one consistent rate no matter how much the spring is compressed. This is a lot different from those progressive rate springs that will offer an initial rate that will be a little bit softer and then eventually firm up the more the spring is compressed. Now those progressive springs will of course dominate the market. You're going to see a lot more of them available here on the site, and that's just because they typically offer the best of both worlds. They're going to be a little better suited for daily driving out there because of that softer initial spring rate, and they'll still perform pretty well thanks to that kind of firmer spring rate you're getting once the spring is actually compressed. However, the problem with those progressive rate springs is the varying rate. So if you're a hardcore road racer out there and you have a progressive spring on your car, you might see one rate at corner entry and then a completely different rate at the apex. Now, will this matter for most owners out there? Well, probably not, but if you're serious about competing with your car, you're serious about road racing, then the linear rate is definitely the way to go because you're going to be getting a more predictable experience with the spring and a more consistent performance with the spring itself as well. Another cool thing to point out with the Ultralites, they are a lighter spring overall. At least according to Steeda, they're going to be about 30% lighter than some of the competition springs and 10% lighter than the factory performance pack springs. And while this isn't necessarily a big number or a massive chunk of weight, every little bit helps, especially when you're serious about competing with your Mustang. But the reality is, guys, most people aren't concerned with setting lap records here. They're more concerned about just lowering their Mustang from an appearance standpoint. And if that sounds like you, well then obviously these things will still get the job done. You'll still lower your Mustang while taking advantage of that linear spring rate. In fact, many of our customers do with no complaints. And the Ultralites will deliver a pretty noticeable drop as well. Again, you're looking at exactly 1 inch in the rear and just over 1 inch in the front, almost 1.25 inches. And this is a pretty sizable drop with the S550. It's enough to totally eliminate any of that ugly wheel gap, and thanks to the fact that that front spring is offering a little bit bigger of a drop, you're going to keep that nose down raked look we like to call that definitely looks sharp on the newer cars. Now this drop will easily clear the stock wheels and tires and all of our pre-configured wheel and tire packages for the 2015 and newer Mustangs. So if you're just kind of curious about how big you can go with a wheel and tire, check those out on the product pages. You'll get a better sense of just what kind of sizes you're looking at. Now, I'm always going to recommend to you guys putting a set of lowering spring like this, pairing them up with an aftermarket set of shocks and struts, because it's just going to be your best bet. And I'm not saying that from a sales standpoint, I'm saying it from an experience standpoint, that pairing an aftermarket lowering spring like this with the factory dampers typically doesn't result in the best performance or the best ride quality, and you can even shorten the life of those factory shocks and struts by doing so. Now, considering the S550 is still a relatively new car, chances are your factory shocks and struts aren't ragged out yet, but it is something to consider moving down the road. And yes, of course, adding those aftermarket shocks and struts will certainly add to your final investment, but you're gonna be in there doing the work when installing these springs. You don't wanna have to do the install twice. Another thing to consider here when adding aftermarket lowering springs is you might wanna consider the use of an aftermarket caster camber plate or even an alignment bolt. And this is just gonna help you get your car back in spec a little bit easier, especially if you're going with a huge drop. The factory components might not be able to get you back in spec. Shouldn't be a huge concern here with the Steeda springs as they're not really slamming the car, but it is something to consider for you as well. And speaking of investment, the Steeda stuff typically rounds out the higher side of the price range. In fact, you're looking at just south of $300 for the Ultralites. Definitely more affordable than one of your other linear options on the site, the Hurst springs, and right in the same ballpark as some of the BMR linear springs. But let's switch gears and talk about the install here with the Ultralite springs. And if you've done an installation for springs on a previous generation Mustang, well then you kind of know what to expect. However, the introduction of the IRS will make the rear install a little bit more difficult. Nevertheless, I'm still sticking with my 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. Maybe 4 hours to a half a day in the shop or garage to get knocked out. As far as tools, well, you're looking at some pretty basic stuff here, guys. This includes a number of sockets and wrenches, a spring compressor, of course, for the front, lift, jack or jack stands, and I'd also recommend a pull jack to help you with the rear subframe because you are gonna need to back some of those bolts out to make the removal of the factory spring and the install of the new Steeda spring possible. The fronts, on the other hand, will definitely be the more time-consuming part of the installation as you do have to remove the strut assembly from the car, remove the factory spring, and install the new Steeda spring using that spring compressor. But overall, anybody should be able to tackle this install with the slightest bit of mechanical expertise. In closing, I'd say the Steeda Ultralite springs are going to be for the S550 owners out there who are serious about improving their handling using a linear spring and want to get a pretty aggressive stance at the same time. So that is my review of the Steeda Ultralite springs, which you can grab right here at AmericanMuscle.com.